Today we're going to talk about arrays. Now arrays are a way to store a sequence of values in a single variable. Those values all have to be the same type, which is homogeneous, and then we access each one of the values in the array by using an index. So for example, in memory, if we have an integer called n, and we give it the number 3, then in memory there's a space given to that variable n. It's the size that the computer needs for an int. And if I assign a 3 to it, then a 3 is put into memory. If I'm going to declare an array, I have to tell the compiler to give the program enough space to hold all the values in the array. So what I would do is I would say, I'm going to have 5 integers. And then what happens is that the program is given memory, 5 integers worth of memory, all contiguous, all one right after the other. And then in order to get to each of those values in memory, you use this index. So this place in memory is for index 0. The next one is for index 1. Next one is for index 2, and on. Now, we always start counting at 0 because computer scientists like to count at 0. So the indexes will always go from 0 to 1 less than the length. So if I'm going to declare an integer here, maybe I want to declare an integer array called num that's of size 5. So I say int, and then I use open and close square brackets, the name of the variable, num, and I say equals new int and the number of values I want to give it. So this is telling the compiler that I want an array that's 5 integers in a row. And the indexes for that array are going to go from 0 to 4. And then what I can do is I can individually assign values to each of those indexes. So think of this as a single variable name. Num of 0 is the name of a variable. And I'm going to assign that a 4. Num of 1, I can assign an 8. Num of 2, I can assign a 12, and onward. Okay, and again, your indexes always go from 0 to 1 minus the length of the array. Now, the thing that's really cool about these indexes is that you can also use variables for the indexes. And usually when you do something to one value in an array, you want to do the same thing to all those values. So what is a good way to do that? A loop. Now you can use any type of loop for an array, but we tend to use for loops. They're simple, they're just one line of code for the loop part. So here's an example. We have for int I equals 0, I less than 5, I plus plus. So this is going to make this I go from 0 to 4, right? Then I can use that value of I as the index for the array, and I can assign it to any value. So what I'm going to do here is num of 0 is going to get the value 0. Num of 1 will get the value 1. Num of 2 will get the value 2, and onward until we get to 4. And then once I is 5, we jump out. So here's another thing we can do. Instead of just assigning the values, we can ask for input for each value. So I can have for int I equals 0, I less than 5, I plus plus, and I can say that num of I equals ct input int, enter the next value for the array. So then as the user enters values, they each go into that index for the array in order. Since we might not always know the length of the array, or we might know it when we declare it, but maybe later we want to change the length of the array. And so we're going to change it when we declare it, and we wouldn't want to necessarily have to find all of our for loops that use that array and find the number so that it knows when to go out of the for loop. So every array comes with a variable called length. So it's num.length, and every array you can find the dot length value. and that is going to be the actual length of the array. So in this case, it's 5. So what I can do is I can use that instead of the number 5. So I can say for int equals 0, int I equals 0, I less than num dot length, I plus plus, and then I can, oh, this is supposed to be I times 5. I can then change num of I to be I times 5. I can do any calculations I want. Another thing that you need to be aware of, obviously, it's a for loop. So in a for loop, if we just have a single line of code, we don't need brackets. But if we were going to have more than one line of code, we'd have to put brackets to keep that within our for loop. I can also initialize the array when I declare it. Now, in order to do this, I would put curly brackets and list each of the values that I want to be in the array. Now, however many values I put into those brackets, that's going to be the size of the array, and it cannot change after that. And the initial values for the array will be in order the values I put in the brackets. So I can say int I, int, open close brackets, num equals, and here in curly brackets I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this array is going to have a length of 5, and num of 0 will have the value 1, and num of 2 will have the value 2, and onward. Okay? And another thing, again, I want to remind you is that each of these values into the array is like a single variable. So I can say int val equals num of 0 plus num of 1. So think of them as individual variables. Here's some other examples of declaring arrays. And arrays can be any type. So I can have double temp equals new double 10. I can have string names equals new string 3. So that's going to give me an array that has 3 strings in it. Or the double will give me an array that has 10 doubles in it, double values. So again, the other way I could initialize the array when I declare it is I can say double temp equals, and I can list however many values I want to go into the array. If I want it to be size 10, I have to list 10 values here. Same with the string array. I can list a bunch of string names. However many names I list, that's how long the array is going to be with those initial values. And then again, you would have a for loop that you can do anything to the values in the array. And if you want to have more than one line of code, you put them into brackets. You can also have arrays of objects. So here's an array of game objects called spots. I just say equals new game object 100. And then I can do a for loop. I can say for int I equals 0, I less than spots dot length, I plus plus, set spots of I to be a circle that maybe is at I times 10, it's size 5 in blue. So I can use my I here, I could use random values, I can do however I would make a circle, and each one of my spots, each value in the array, will be a different one of the little circles that are on the screen. Let's go through the reading for the week, and I can explain it all. Hopefully it made sense to you already, but we'll go through it. So here is an example of declaring arrays with initializing their values. So there's an int array, a double. So for example, the Boolean, true, false, false, true. How many values are in that array? There are 4. So this length of the array is 4, and the indexes go from 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay? Game object walls, they have this left wall, top wall, bottom wall. Well, those walls better be defined somewhere up above where we define these 3 walls to be inside of this array. Okay, here we have string names equals Doug, Sue, Pat, and then you can print each one of the names. And again, you think of each one of these variables with the index, think of that as a single variable. Okay, and here's another example. If we want to change one of the names, you can say names of one equals Abby, and then when you print them, now that one has been changed. Here is using an index in an expression. So this is another thing, as I was saying, is great, is that this index can also be a variable. So we can just say, int I equals 1, and then we can look at sizes of 1, or whatever you set the index to, you can use that, and it can be a variable, so it can change, which is how it works so nicely in for loops. Here we have a string of months, and then the user is going to enter the month. But users think of months as starting at 1, 2, 3. So you'd think of June as 6, right? But June here is really going to be in spot 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have to take the month that they inputted and subtract 1 to get to the correct month that's in the array. So if I put in 6 here, I want month 6, I have to look at months of 6 minus 1, so months of 5. This one here, you have to make sure, again, your string is the size that you initialize it to. So the indexes can only be 0, 1, and 2. And here we're trying to use the index 3, and that's going to cause an error. That's not going to work. Here we're using the months array in a for loop, and again, you could have, instead of saying I less than 12 here, you could say I less than months dot length. There are some shortcuts which we're not really going to get into, but you can just have for string month colon months. So this is going to go through each of the months, print the month. So it's a shortcut for a for loop when you have an array. It's called an enhanced for loop. Here, now, instead of initializing the array with the brackets and the names, we're going to declare a blank array. Okay, string names equals new string, and we give it the size in square brackets. So, Doug, names of 0 is Doug, names of 1 is Sue, names of 2 is Pat. So that will tell us that the size is the same as if we initialize the values with the curly brackets, but we don't have to initialize it right when we declare it. Instead, we can set the values later. Here we're going to declare a blank integer array and then set the values to random numbers between 0 and 5. So we just have a for loop. We're going to declare the array here, size 10. We're going to have a for loop that sets the sizes of the array to a random number between 0 and 5. And then we're going to go through again and print each of the values. And again, when we initialize an array, there are initial values that a blank array gets. It's not good to assume what the values are going to be. If you want to make sure that your values are all initialized to say 0, it's best to run a little for loop to do that. But there are default values, so integers default to a 0, doubles are a 0, Boolean defaults to false, strings and game objects default to null. There's nothing in them. And again, we can have arrays of game objects. So here's an example. Game object balls equals new game object 10. So now we're going to have 10 balls. And we're going to have here for a for loop that puts 10 balls up at different places and randomly puts them up there, and they're all going to be size 10 and they're all going to be red. And then in update, we can move the balls around. So you can have a for loop that maybe changes the X of each of the balls. So this is going to make the balls wherever they are on the screen, it's going to make them move over to the right. And if it gets to be greater than 100, then they're going to change it to -10, and it'll start over from off the screen and it'll come back on the screen. So that's how you would move your variables that are in an array in Update. So you're going to, in fact, I think your homework assignment is going to have you do this. Okay, let's look at this example. It's called ArrayLoops.java. It's a class ArrayLoops. It is going to basically be an example of searching for a value in an array. So we first declare an array of nums, and it has all of these values that are initially declared in it. Then we're going to first check to see if any of the values are 0 and tell us where the zeros are found. So for loop here goes from 0 to nums of length, and we just say if nums of I equals 0, then print 0 score found at index I. So if you go through here, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. At index 8, we're going to find a 0. So that will mean it will print 0 score found at index 8. And then it'll continue on 9, 10, 11. It's also going to find a 0 at 11 and at 12. So you can use that nums of I in an if statement to check for a value. And then they're going to ask for a number to find. So if we find the number, then we're going to say that we found it and where we found it. And if we don't find the number, we're going to print that we have not found it. So we're going to have a function called findNumber here that's Boolean, and that's going to go through each of the values in the array. And notice that we're passing the number that we're looking for. The array is declared above start, so it is a global variable, can be used anywhere here. So we don't have to pass it to the function, we can use it. So for I is equal to 0, I less than nums length, I plus plus, we're going to say if nums of I is equal to the number that was passed. Then we can say found it at index plus I. Okay, so that's going to tell us which index you found it at, and it's going to return true. And if you make it all the way through the loop without finding the value, then it's going to print not found and return false. So that is a really great example of using the array in a function that is a search function. Here's another example. There's scores before and scores after. Let's look at scores before first, and then we're going to see how it's changed. So what they're doing here is using variables without using an array. Okay, so we're going to set up these scores. We'll have each score be a different variable name, score 1 through score 7, and we'll assign it a value. And then they have a function that prints the scores, figures out the average of the scores, and then it prints that out. Down here you have print scores, the scores are, and it prints each one separately with the scores. And then here we figure out the average, where we're literally adding score 1 plus score 2 plus score 3 all the way up to score 7, and then dividing the total by the number of scores, and then we're printing the average. This part of the code here allows you to change the score for a particular program. So it's going to have you enter which program you want to change the score for, and then the new score. So what it has to do is the first value that you put in is the program number, and the next value is the new score. So if the program number is 1, then we're going to change score 1. If it's 2, we're going to change score 2, and so forth. So we need to have this very long if-else statement, and if you put in a number that isn't valid, it'll print this is not a valid program. So now over here we can look at how to do this with arrays. So the first thing they did was, instead of having all of these variables and setting them up separately, they initialized the scores to an array and listed all the scores in that array right here when it was declared. Then we have the same thing, the print scores and the print average. And if you look at print scores down here, instead of going through and printing each one separately, they're just doing a for loop. So look at how much easier this is. You have a loop that goes from 0 to scores of length, and then you print program. Why did they put I plus 1? Because I is going to start at 0, but that in our real world is program 1. So if you add 0 plus 1, you get 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. So that's going to give us the correct program number that's printed, and then you're going to print the score of that I. So look at how much nicer that is to do it in a loop with an array rather than all these print statements. Same with the printing the average. Instead of adding up each individual score, all we do is we have a total we initialize to 0, and then we just add each score in the loop. Now imagine if you wanted to maybe add 3 more scores to your program. Okay, so now you're going to have 10 scores. So now you'd have to go back and add program score 8, score 9, score 10, all over the place. Here you wouldn't have to change anything. The only thing you'd have to change is when you initialize the array. You'd have to put in the other 3 scores. Everything else can stay the same. No other coding. Whereas in here, you'll have to add a lot of code. And then this also prints the average. So now let's look at the actual start here. In start, where we print the scores, then we see if we want to change one of the scores. So all we have to do is we're going to make the index the program number -1 that they inputted, and then if it's an incorrect index, or the score is, if its index is less than 0 or larger than the length, so we want to make sure they're not putting in an invalid index number, which is what we did here. We had this error if we went through the whole if-else statement. So here we're going to first check if the index is less than 0 or it's greater than or equal to the length. Then we have an invalid program number, and otherwise all we have to do is say scores of that program number -1 equals the new score that was read in. Look at how much nicer that is rather than this whole if-else statement. So you can see how using an array is so much cleaner. If we needed to change the program, add some more scores, in the array version, we only have to change the initialization, and none of our other code has to change. Whereas in the non-array version, you'd have a lot of changes that you need to make. Finally, I want to go through the programming assignment real quick. It's going to be very much like last week's programming assignment, where you'll get some code that have instructions and you need to fill in the code for each of the instructions. So there will be 10 different exercises, and you'll have output for each of the exercises, and then there's going to be a little bit of graphics. So let me show you what the initial program looks like. So you're going to have examples. There's a print that you're going to do something with an array. So here, declare and initialize an array that contains integers from 5 to 10. So here you have this array from integers from 5 to 10, and then print the array using the printIntArray function. So there's a printIntArray function that you pass that array to. Okay, print the first value in the array. So now you're going to print just example array of 0. And so there are going to be all these exercises that have you do things with arrays. You're given 2 functions. Three functions. There's a printIntArray, so that's going to print an array of integers. There's a printStringArray, that will print an array of strings, and in that function there's something called printString, so there's a function here that prints the string for you. So depending on if it tells you to print integers or print strings, you're going to use one of those 2 functions in each of your exercises, and it tells you which one to use. And you'll have 10 different exercises that use loops and use arrays, and then you're going to have some graphics exercises that are 1, 2, and 3. The third one is in update. This is very similar to the example I showed you in the reading. So it shouldn't be a problem, but if you have any questions, please feel free to email me anytime. And also remember, I have my office hours on Thursdays from 4 to 5. But you can always contact me anytime. Send me copies of your code, send me questions. I'm always happy to help. So have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week.